Welcome to another episode of Whitetail Rendezvous, coming to you 6 days a week as we interview whitetail experts and hear their traditions and personal stories of the hunt. Learn more about the latest gear, discover proven tips, and the latest strategies so you can make your next hunt a success. Now, here's your host, Bruce Hutchin.
Whitetail Rendezvous is pleased to announce a partnership with GoHunt.com. Who's GoHunt.com? Well, if you're a DIY hunter, you need the information at GoHunt.com/insider. Why? Because it provides 4,200 profiles, every unit, every species, and every season. Furthermore, they give in-depth analysis, interactive maps, unit access, and seasonal trends. Draw odds are very important, and they give you the most accurate information in the business. All this is available when you go to GoHunt.com/insider. Make sure you use promo code WR when you join Insider. You'll get a $50 gift card for GoHunt.com Gear Shop. Remember, when you become a member of GoHunt.com/insider, you're going to get a $50 gift card to Go Hunt Gear Shop. What's in the gear shop? The best gear that you can buy for hunting the West. All in all, if you're hunting out West in 2018, GoHunt.com/insider is where you need to be to get all the research information. When you use promo code WR, Whitetail Rendezvous receives a small commission from GoHunt.com. This is Bruce Hutchin, the host of Whitetail Rendezvous, and we're traveling out to Iowa today, and we're going to connect with Jordon Howell. Now, Jordon came out of the mountains of North Carolina, but he sure as heck didn't stay there because there weren't any big deer there. So he started for the Midwest and made up his mind to move out to the Midwest, and he did that and moved to Indiana and started to learn how to hunt deer. And he decided, let me see here, about 2016. Is that correct, Jordon?
Yep, 2016.
Yeah, he moved to southern Iowa, and Iowa is the land of giants, folks, and everybody knows that, so we don't have to embellish that anymore. But the thing you're going to enjoy with the episode today is that Jordon is a DIY self-taught hunter. So, Jordon Howell, welcome to Whitetail Rendezvous.
Thank you, sir.
Well, Jordon, in the warm-up, he talked about a lot of different things, and, I'm going to start right off. Why did you even start hunting? What got you going?
When I was little, none of my family actually actively hunted, but my dad, one of my favorite things to do when I was a kid, he would tell me stories about when he used to live out west in Colorado and would hunt elk and mule deer and track them in the snow and the high country. And he had actually quit hunting, because of some health reasons. And so he was never actually able to take me out hunting, but I was completely fascinated with listening to him talk about the stories of him and his buddy. And in North Carolina, we didn't have any elk or mule deer or anything like that to go after. And so about the only thing we had was whitetails, and we didn't have very many of those. But so when I was about 12 or 13, went and got myself a bow and decided I was going to learn how to hunt on my own. And I wasn't very good at it. It took me a long time to kill my first deer, but that's basically where I got my start.
Now, uncles and grandpas, they didn't hunt, or best friends didn't hunt at all?
Well, when I was younger, the friends that I had, most of them didn't. Most of their parents didn't. There were some kids in my school that hunted, but they weren't really the group of friends that I was in when I was in my younger years. And so I was literally just relying on my dad's stories. That's really the only exposure I had to hunting early on.
So what really got you going? What fueled the fire, made you as passionate as you are, as you have a number of, Pope and Young class, to your credit? Where'd that passion come from?
Well, to me, it was the challenge and the satisfaction of being able to go after one of the smartest animals that lives on the planet. I was unbelievably frustrated, the first few years trying to hunt deer, and I actually started with a bow as opposed to a rifle like most people because my mom didn't want me to own a rifle. So the only thing I had was to learn how to bow hunt, which I'm actually thankful that she didn't buy me a rifle because it taught me a lot more, I think, than if I'd started out with a rifle. And that first deer that I got, I mean, he was just a little old button buck. He wasn't anything special, but I was so proud of that deer, and he might as well have been Milo Hansen's deer. And every deer that I killed after that, I learned a little bit more. And when I finally started getting into trying to target bigger deer and figuring out that they're a completely different animal than a regular whitetail, and I have so much respect for a mature whitetail buck, the way that they think and the way that they act, that it's really the passion for me is that the challenge behind targeting mature deer in particular and being able to do that with consistency is and doing it in a position like I am where I don't own any land at all. I mean, I certainly don't have access to thousands of acres of managed land. I mean, granted, I would if I could, but me being basically a blue collar guy who has to do it on a regular budget and is completely self taught. I never had anybody to hold my hand or show me how to hunt a deer. I just enjoy the challenge of it.
And it is challenging because, there's hundreds of books and magazines and videos and shows, and, it's a huge industry. Somebody said, $34 billion industry, the whitetail industry, with over 15 million people that participate in it. And so it's a huge business. But, some of us do it because we just like to sit around the campfire in the cabin or, behind hay bales and do nothing but rifle hunt. Other people hunt with their muzzleloaders or archers, and, compound. Not compound.
Hmm.
Yeah, compounds are stick and a string, and then crossbows. So there's a lot of different ways to take a whitetail, but consistently taking Pope and Young class deer is a tough chore. And then you've got some, over 150 inches. And you took three of bucks in 2017. So how did that all work out? Did you hunt three different states, or how did that come to be?
In Iowa, as a resident, you're allowed to get two buck tags anyway. You can get a statewide archery and a statewide gun tag, and then I'm also a farm tenant. I farm about 260 acres where I live, and so you can also get a farm landowner tag, which is an extra buck tag. And so all three of the deer were taken in Iowa.
Okay. Thanks for explaining that, because some people might say when they hear the show, well, how does that work? Well, folks, you just heard from Jordon how that all works out in Iowa for residents. Now, as far as I know, non-residents, we get one tag and one deer, and we can shoot a doe, but that's it.
Right. Yeah. Non-resident is completely different. I mean, non-residents are limited to certain zones they can hunt in certain seasons, and it's not that way for a resident. I go to the hardware store and buy a $24 tag, and I'm good to
go. Thank you very much. It's all good. If you're farming, and putting seed in the ground and Roundup down and other herbicides, and then coming back and putting your fertilizer down and then picking it up at the end of the year and harvest, you get a lot of money to spend. So, good for you. I can buy every tag in Colorado for about $800. So if I put them in a draw, ladies and gentlemen, in Colorado, that's how much it costs to put for everything in the state into the draw. And they just changed that this year. In fact, it's $3 to apply. Anyway, getting back to that, I thought we'd put the first part of the show or first half of the show and talk, specifically and about the $3 that you did take in 2017, because collectively the average, I'm going to call it 159, something in there, close to 160. So, to shoot one 150 class deer or better is darn good any place. but to take 3, that's a little different. So which one do you want to start off with?
Well, I guess the first one that I killed on opening day, October 1st.
All right. So how did you know where he was? And just walk us through it. I mean, because you shed hunt, I know you got cameras out, and we'll give a plug. You can give a plug for the Radix trail cameras, at any time you want. But so just take us through one when you first see him, and then tell us the story.
Sure. Well, the hunt for that particular deer started in 2016 when I first moved to Iowa. He actually lived on the very first piece of property I ever got permission to hunt on in Iowa. I had lived in Iowa about a week. We had got moved in, and I had a week before I had to start my new job. And I told my wife, I'm like, I'm going to go knock on doors and find permission. And people think that it's such a myth or something that, you can't find permission on quality ground in a premium state just, without spending a bunch of money. And it literally took me two days to find this farm. Very nice landowner, and just knocked on the door, got permission. And what's unique about the property is it's 460 acres, but there's only about 5 acres of woods. The entire rest of the property is nothing but cattle pasture that's fenced off in about 40-acre sections, and it's active cattle pasture. So it really doesn't look like premium deer habitat. But what makes this property special is the property that sits next to it, the neighbors, is not hunted, and it is a giant sanctuary. It's about 250 acres of just brush and cedars and creek bottoms and just all the cover a whitetail could ever want. And basically all the deer live there. But the farm that I have access to, a lot of those 40-acre sections, not all of them have cows in at the same time because they're rotated, and some of them are kept as hay fields, and so there's a lot of alfalfa. Some have beans, some have corn, so there's a lot of food. So even though it's wide open, in the evenings, deer literally pour out into this property. I mean, 30, 40, 50 deer an evening you'll see out in this cow pasture. It's pretty challenging to hunt because the terrain is so wide open, but it's pretty rolling. And so in 2016, I started hunting it out of ground blinds because that's the only way you can hunt it. There's no trees really to speak of. And I started seeing with consistency this really big 170-inch 10-point coming out in the same general area during bow season from October 1st to about October 28th. I think I saw him 5 times, and he would always come out into the cattle pasture in the same place, and he would always walk past the exact same row of round hay bales. So there's not a lot of terrain features, but deer are creatures of edge, and that row of hay bales gave him something to hide behind when he walked. And so every time I saw him, no matter where he came out, he would end up by those hay bales. And I didn't have a way to get over there, and the season was already in progress, so I didn't want to go put up a new blind and disturb it. And so I basically tried to hunt him from a distance, got close a couple of times with my bow, but never got a shot. And actually during shotgun season, I had my wife with me, and she was shotgun hunting, and we almost got a shot at him. He ran past our blind, actually chasing a doe fawn in December. Before the end of the season, I ended up seeing that deer like eight different times, and always on one particular part of the farm, and it was always concentrated around this group of hay bales with a little pond behind it. And the season ended. I didn't get him. Put my cameras out last summer. Didn't have any summer velvet pictures of him. And even the previous summer, I had 0 velvet pictures of him. I never saw him until the season had started. And so I knew that buck really didn't spend the summertime near that property, that he kind of moved in once October came around. And the same thing kind of this year, or this past season, no velvet pictures. And then on September the 6th, I checked the trail camera and I had 2 pictures of him in daylight. And honestly, that's all I needed to know. I was confident in that deer that he had not been pressured. No one had hunted this property other than me in a long time. And I just had a hunch that he might do the same thing in 2017 that he did the year before. And so when I got that picture of him on September 6th, I went back to that row of hay bales and I put up an elevated blind. I built a little platform about 5 feet tall and put a pop up on top of it so I could see over the hay bales. And it's literally just out in the middle of a cattle pasture. There's not a tree within 200 yards. But I just had a hunch that that deer would do the same thing. Clearly a super mature deer. I think he was 7.5 years old. And I found that a lot of these super mature deer, they will find something that works, something that's kept them alive for years and years, and they will keep doing that. I think the super mature deer are oftentimes more patternable than like a 3 or 4 year old deer is, because they found what works. And so I put that blind up and left it completely alone. I knew the information I needed. I didn't go back. And opening night, I actually had another deer that I was going to target, but my wife wanted to come with me. And I didn't really want her up in a tree stand. She was pregnant. And so I said, well, come with me and we'll go sit in that blind. I said, the wind's right for that. And I know there's a pretty good deer that we got a good chance to see anyway. And so we get up in the blind, and this is October 1st, opening night. I'm just really just happy to be back in the woods again. It was the very first hunt of the year. Just looking forward to seeing some does. And, the evening progressed, does start coming out, little bucks. We had probably about 35 deer out in front of us in the alfalfa. And about 10 minutes before the end of shooting light, my wife actually spotted the buck. He hopped the fence to the north of us, and she spotted a big rack coming over the hill. And she actually saw him before I did. And I pulled up my binoculars, and instantly I recognized it was him. It was the same deer from 2016, and he was doing the exact same thing. He was marching right at us, right towards the hay bales. And so I got ready, and he was getting pretty close, and we had some other deer that were actually right under us, and so I didn't want him to spook. And so when he was a little over 40 yards out, I ended up stopping him, and he was broadside. Shot him, double lunged him, and he only went about 50 yards and tipped over. So it was a pretty awesome way to start the season.
Now, is that the buck with the scent crusher in front of him? The scent crusher bag?
That's the one.
Yeah, in the alfalfa. And then I don't see the hay bales there. In the background, I see a few trees or something, or that might be a hill or something.
Yeah, those pictures are actually taken at my house the next day. So.
Oh, okay. Okay, they're not in the field. Okay, folks. So I just stumbled through that. Jordan, thank you for correcting me. So let's pick that apart. One, older deer, and I love how you said, he's lived 7.5 years, so he knows what works. One, he has a sanctuary to live in during hunting season, but where he spends June, July, August, the winter, basically we don't know, do we?
No, I didn't. But once I figured out that he was kind of doing the same thing, I really didn't care. If he felt I think he felt that neighboring property, since it doesn't get hunted, is like you said, it's a sanctuary for hunting season. And so he probably has access or had access to, a big soybean field somewhere that he was spending the summer. And once those beans started turning yellow, he went back to his fall range, which happened to be where I was hunting him.
Now, where'd you put the cameras up? On fence posts, or how'd you set cameras up?
So I actually had to get pretty creative. I used electric fence wire, and I would make little fences. I would use the farmers' bale yards where the landowner has electric fence, basically keeping the cows out of the hay bales until she wants them to get to them. So I would go around inside the bale yards and put cameras up. I had couple mineral sites inside the bale yards, and then fence jumps where on fence posts, like you said, I'd take a camera with like a stick and pick and put it on a T post right where a fence jump where they come into the property is, and see which fence jumps they were using.
Explain fence jumps for people that might not know what they are.
Well, so in southern Iowa, like many places in the Midwest, has a lot of cattle country, and so there's a lot of just 3-strand or 4-strand barbed wire fence or woven wire fence. They're originally put up for cattle, and you'll see that even through the timber in a lot of places. And so deer, they're smart, but they're lazy. They'll always, most of the time anyway, pick the easiest spot to cross that fence where something's fallen on it and the wire's a little bit lower, or the wires are loose, or something where there's a little bit of a knoll where they can get over it easier. And you'll notice it's pretty clear. You'll see big divots on both sides and a pretty heavy trail where the deer prefer to cross the fence. And so I find those types of places and use those to put cameras up to see what deer are using which fence crossings.
And folks, if you're in a new property and you see, some likely trails and there isn't an advantage, I think the deer, you can create that, especially if it's barbed wire. You just twist the top barbed wire down with permission from whoever owns the property. But that has worked for a lot of people to kind of funnel them, if that's the correct word, Jordan. You can use that to funnel them into a field, and especially where you have trees, it gets them closer to you. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, for sure. If you're allowed to, I've many times lowered a top strand or sometimes even opened up a small section of fence. I've done that on some other properties to actually encourage deer to cross in a certain spot, and they will do that.
So that's kind of something, if you haven't tried that tip, go ahead and try it. You mentioned he was the buck that you, number one buck, he was about 40 yards out and you stopped him. Now, how'd you do that?
I just made a little noise with my mouth. He was calm, he was walking, so I would have let him kept coming, but I had another probably 120-inch deer about 5 yards away, and I didn't want to spook him, and so I made just a little noise with my mouth while he was about 40 yards away to get him. I just needed a couple seconds for him to stop so I could settle my pin.
No, 40 yards. He was pretty relaxed, you said, so he didn't even try to jump the string, did he?
No. He didn't drop at all when I hit him. And a lot of that too is it's October 1st, it's opening day. None of the deer have been shot at for a long time, and so they're not on pins and needles like they are in January.
Good point. And off the farm that I'm privileged to hunt, Garrett took the biggest deer we've ever taken off. It was the second day of the season in September, and this is in Wisconsin, and just a beautiful deer. And he had watched it all summer, and the buck was running with some other bucks, and he got in there, and the second evening, it was all over, and he took a gorgeous deer, kind of like you did. It was opening day, right?
Right.
So lessons learned there, folks. Early in the season, you don't have to wait for the rut. If you can pattern the buck and you have a setup like Jordan has, not too many people hunting it. 2, you got a sanctuary nearby. You got tons of food, literally, and you're creative in setting them up. So let's think back, to your creativity of setting up that blind, 5 feet off the ground, so you can see over the bales, and you get a little pop-up blind, staked down to some plywood. Why'd you think that would work rather than just putting a ground blind in between the bales or in front of the bales or whatever?
Well, I wanted to be able to see what was coming before it was right on top of me. And the pasture that I was hunting over has some topography to it, and so there's a little bit of a hill about 30 yards out from me, and with the blind sitting right on the ground, you can't see over the hill. But with the blind elevated, I could see all the way to the fence where the deer actually drop. And so instead of, the deer being in range before I know they're there, it gave me a lot more visibility. That was really the thought process behind it. And I did it early enough in the year where the deer didn't pay any attention to it at all.
Yeah, just another blob out there, right?
Yeah. I mean, and it's a working cattle farm. And so there's always stuff changing, bales being moved and tractors. And so the deer really don't pay that much attention to new structures appearing anyway.
So let's get back to the teaching moment that taught me and hopefully the listeners. You got a wide open, pasture and not a tree to be seen. You got some little bit of topography and you got some hay bales, and you figured it out by just watching the deer. And as we talked in the warm up, you think about deer 365 days a year. I know that. Then you zero in on one deer, forget about a hit list. You may have one, but once you see the right deer, you go after them. And so, how did you develop this thinking man's whitetail hunting?
Well, I have just noticed over different years of doing it that paying attention to little things makes a big difference. Not being afraid to think outside the box. I mean, a lot of guys would look at a farm that has no trees and think it's unhuntable, unless you've got a rifle or something. And I kind of had that mentality too, coming from the East Coast where you've got hundreds of thousands of acres of timber. I'm a tree stand guy, but I kind of had to break that mold and figure and not so much worry about what tactics am I comfortable with. I had to start thinking about what do I need to do to kill this deer? What is this deer's weak spot? Where does he feel safe? And what do I need to do to adapt in order to do that? And that's honestly how I approach every deer that I go after now. I don't let myself be limited by any particular, tactic or anything. That deer, he knew he was safe out in the middle of that cow pasture because he could see all around him, and he knew nobody had ever hunted him out there. And so nobody in a tree stand was ever going to get a shot at that deer. And so the previous year, watching him do that, he would chase does out of that sanctuary and take them out there in the cow pasture and spend all day with them out there where he was safe. And so it's just being adaptable and reading each situation and figuring out, trying to find each individual buck's chink in his armor and try to capitalize on that.
And they all do have chinks, because they're habitual. They really are, if unpressured. You can definitely get on bucks, but first you have to locate, and that's why I'm a big believer in long distance scouting, which you do out west anyway. You just have to, because you can't, you just can't cover the miles. You have to let the glass do the work. But more and more people are doing it, out of their pickup or from a knoll or a hillside, and finding bucks and just watching them, from afar. And that's become more and more prevalent by people who are successfully scoring every year on mature deer. No question about that. So, when you spot a deer, you watch the deer, this deer you pattern, and you close the deal. What was the number one lesson he taught you during that period of time?
I think that I'm becoming more and more of a believer in previous year's data on deer. When it comes to mature deer, I'm not talking about just any deer, but when it comes to a super mature deer, I think there is a lot of value in keeping track of what the deer did the year before. And it's not an exact science, but I've seen it a lot of times where even with something like trail camera pictures, if you get a trail camera picture of a deer and you check it and he's on there, that's great. That doesn't necessarily mean you can go get in the stand and kill that deer, because by the time you check that picture, he's already been there. He might be somewhere else. But if you can go back and look at previous year's data, I'm fairly young, but I'm kind of old school. I keep a logbook, like a manual logbook of all my hunts, and I log down, what I saw and where I saw it, and when I got a picture of a certain deer. And I have files on specific deer. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous to the extent I go to, but if you can go back and look and see on this date range, this deer was in this general area, in the daylight for, a year or 2 years in a row, there's a good chance he's going to do that in the future. And one of the biggest things that deer taught me is how much that can be true. Because if I had just approached that like a new season, setting up on the areas where most of the other deer were going and setting up on traditional sign, I wouldn't have even been in the game on that deer. I would have been the same way as I was the year before. But it was because I didn't have a trail camera picture of that deer next to those hay bales in 2017. The trail camera picture I had of him was on a different side of the farm, but I remembered from the year before that was his favorite spot to go when he was on that farm. And so me hunting there was based on what he did the previous year.
A guy named Fred Bear, it's been told, kept a journal for every single hunt he was on. And the people, historians and everything like that, handwritten, and just a wealth of knowledge that he learned, from all over any place he hunted. He kept the journal of that hunt, and that helped make him the hunter, he was. And it's just amazing. Even with, we have self iPhones and everything, we can collect data right in the field. But like yourself, you said it's ridiculous the data you have. And I'll counter that. No, it's not ridiculous. That's one of the reasons for your success, because you're studying the deer. You're not just hunting. And there's a huge difference of that. I've been both. I've studied specific animals and been successful and not been successful. And other times I just went hunting and to see what would turn up. And, both techniques will work. But if you really want to hone in on specific deer, the more data you have, the better off you're going to be. Your thoughts?
No, I agree. The information is key. I mean, there's no such thing as too much information, and there's little tidbits of information or just puzzle pieces, and that's really all hunting big deer is. Is it once in a while you might get lucky and kill one, but more often than not, when you kill a big deer, it's because you're able to put together all those little pieces over time and figure out where you needed to be.
Yeah, and my friend Garrett Shear, he spent the whole summer on that deer, and the deer was only down from the house, 200 yards. The house, road, timber, food, and he could almost watch them from the road. You have foliage, of course, in the summer, but it was interesting how much time he put on that deer, and you know, it was just amazing, what he did. He's kind of spoiled now. He's in his 20s, and he's taking, a Boone and Crockett class deer with his bow. But enough of that. Now, before we go to deer number 2, let's give a shout out to Radix trail cameras. What makes them special for you?
Well, started doing some work with Radix last year. They're a pretty new name in the trail camera industry. We actually have the smallest trail camera that's on the market, and the image sensors in the cameras are super big, and so the pictures that we get are more comparable to what you would see like an entry level DSLR camera take. Our image quality is what we really like about them, and our small size is what people really like. Our smallest cameras 3 inches by 4 inches by 1.5 inches, and so they're smaller than most wallets. They're smaller than an iPhone. They're easy to hide, which is good for guys that have cameras that tend to grow legs.
And are you like on their pro staff or?
I am actually their field and pro staff manager, so I actually oversee the people that are on their field and pro staff and help with marketing for the company.
So you want to give a shout out if somebody wants to get a hold of you regarding pro staff, or you would rather not?
Yeah. My email is Jordon at radixtrailcameras.com. You can get a hold of me there, or there's a field staff tab on our website at radixtrailcameras.com, and you can contact me through there also.
So we got number one buck out of the way. Tell us about number two.
Well, number two is a very different type of story. He actually lives on my home farm where I live, on 260 acres there. And that deer, I 2017 was the first year I hunted that farm. We just moved in and into that farm in April of 2017. And so as soon as I got there and crops are in the ground, I had to start thinking about, the important stuff, deer. So I started putting a bunch of cameras out on mineral sites, and I picked this deer up almost immediately. But before I go any further, trail cameras absolutely 100% killed this deer as much as I did. I learned everything I knew about this deer because of trail camera data, and there's no way I would have killed him otherwise. This deer did not live on my 260 acres. I didn't know where he lived, but he would come into my mineral site about once a week, maybe twice a week, in the middle of the night, like the dead of night, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. So I knew he was traveling a long way from wherever it was that he actually lived. And because I had other bucks that were residents that I would literally have on my mineral site morning, noon, and night every day, I knew that they lived there pretty close. This deer, he would just kind of show up for a day or two, and then he'd disappear for a week. So I knew that my farm really wasn't his primary core. And the same thing kind of happened, once Velvet came off September. Actually, there's a creek bottom that kind of winds through the middle of the property, and there's alfalfa on one side, and then some CRP with a bean field on the other side. And the creek bottom kind of winds north to south, and at the very north tip, I actually planted a food plot with some radishes and oats, and I put a hay bale blind there. Once again, there was not many trees for the wind that I wanted to hunt that spot on. I wanted to hunt it on a west wind, and there was nothing but a CRP field on that side, so I put up a hay bale blind on a platform. And so I would get pictures of him in my food plot in the middle of the night, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, once a week. And so really I wasn't focused on hunting this deer. There were a couple other deer that were actually bigger that I was actually wanting to hunt. And I was still trying to figure all of them out because it was a new property and first year I'd been there. And throughout mid-October, late October, same thing. I started picking him up on some mock scrapes, but all on this western side of my farm. I never had him on camera once over on the eastern side. So I kind of had narrowed it down a little bit. He was coming from somewhere to the west because I never seemed to pick him up on except one side of the farm. And then about November 2nd, I actually had taken vacation from work to hunt, but the weather was going to be awful. It was going to be muggy and foggy and warm, and the wind was not right for anywhere I wanted to sit. And so I was going to harvest beans that day, but it was too wet early in the morning, and you can't run the combine when the beans are too wet, and so you got to let them dry out and burn off a little bit. And so I said, well, I'm just going to climb in this observation stand I had way on the south end of the farm. It actually overlooks the neighbors, and as well as like a big 40-acre cedar thicket on my side. And so I climbed up there. I'm just going to sit for an hour or so and just see what the deer are doing. On that morning, I saw this deer for the first time I'd ever laid eyes on him, and I'd never had a daylight picture of this deer ever. But I saw him on the neighbor's property to the south, about a half mile away, stand up out of this little tiny creek bottom with 2 does. And I said to myself, okay, I know where this deer is living now. He's living in this cow pasture on the neighbors to the south. That's why I never get a daylight picture of him, because he has to walk 3/4 of a mile to get to my camera. And I already knew that he never used the east side of the farm because I had a bunch of cameras over there. And so I basically reconcentrated all my efforts. The two bigger deer that I was going after had gone MIA. I didn't know what had happened to them, but this deer, I knew he was moving in daylight because I saw him with my own eyes. So that told me I have a chance to kill this deer. I just have to figure out where he's moving in daylight, because clearly he's not getting to my food plot until after dark. So I surrounded that creek bottom with cameras. I put like 8 cameras in probably a 30-acre area. So, I mean, this deer wasn't going to be able to breathe in that creek bottom without me knowing about it. And I was hunting every day, going in, checking my cameras on my way in and on my way out, and just trying to find what was going on with this deer. So I had seen him on the 2nd. On the 3rd, the wind was not good for where I wanted to sit in the creek bottom. I did have a stand actually down in the timber in the creek bottom and not at the point where my food plot was. Wind was not good, so I hunted a stand over on the east side of the farm where I knew he wasn't, but I had to be in a tree somewhere. Obviously didn't see the deer. Then on the morning of the 4th, a buddy of mine, about an hour after daylight, shot a nice deer, so I got down and I went to help him. Well, in the afternoon, the wind had switched back out of the west, the direction I needed it to be, so I went back to check a couple of my cameras I had on the western edge of that creek bottom. And lo and behold, I had 2 daylight pictures of this deer on the 3rd and on the 4th. So I had seen him on the 2nd in daylight, and then on the 3rd in the evening, he walked 10 yards in front of my stand in daylight. And on the morning of the 4th, when I had got down to go help my buddy, he had walked past the same stand again. So I confirmed he moved in daylight 3 days in a row. And so I figured I can kill this deer. I just need to get aggressive and get on him. Because all the times that I'd either had pictures or seen him in daylight, he was actively looking for does. He was a super aggressive deer. I just had a feeling he was. So I got in that stand on the 5th and actually saw the deer come out of the creek bottom where my creek bottom stand was, which the wind was not right for. So I didn't get a shot at him that evening, but I confirmed that he was there, and that made 4 days in a row he was moving in daylight. And once again, confirmed where I knew that he was bedding, because he came right up the creek from the cow pasture on the neighbors, went right up the creek bottom past my other stand. So then on the 6th, I hunted that same stand again, had the same wind, saw every other deer, I think, in the state of Iowa except him. I saw like 36. I saw 36 bucks from the stand on November 6th. Probably the most incredible day of rutting action I'd ever seen. He's literally the only buck that I didn't see. But a couple days later, I checked another camera that was on the opposite side of the creek bottom out of my sight, and he had actually walked through there at 9:30 in the morning past another one of my stands. So he was moving in daylight again in that creek bottom. So I really wanted to get in my creek bottom stand because every day he's walking past it, but the wind wasn't right. So I tried again on the 7th. Wind still wasn't right. Didn't see him again on the 7th, but a couple days later confirmed he had again walked on the other side out of my line of sight in the morning, and then came back in the evening in daylight. So I had him pinned to this 10-acre section of creek bottom. I just couldn't get the right wind to hunt it. And finally on November the 8th, I had a southwest wind, and I was so happy. It was the first time I was going to be able to actually get in that creek bottom. So I went in there before dark, climbed up in the tree, and lo and behold, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he stood up out of the neighbor's cow pasture and came wandering up the creek bottom past me at 35 yards, and I shot him.
Now, how wide is that creek bottom?
At its widest point, it's probably 70 yards. It's not super wide. It's literally just a strip in between 2 fields that's timbered with a creek in the middle.
So would you call that pinch points throughout it, or just a huge long funnel?
Yeah, the whole thing's pretty much a long funnel. It's just kind of meanders along down in the low spot in between the 2 fields.
Amazing. So, listeners, takeaways, not everybody can have as many trail cameras as Jordan. I get that, but make what you have, make the best use of them. And again, you know, figure the deer out. Think the deer out and close the circle, close the circle, close the circle till you're at 35 yards and the deal's done. Because Jordan did have him just across the creek and couldn't see him on one of the days. Amazing, amazing. Well, let's move on to buck number 3.
Okay, well, that one is a little bit simpler, but it actually goes back to previous year history, which is something I believe more and more in every year. This was actually on the same farm where I shot the deer opening day. I did not have any previous history with this deer, no trail camera pictures of him. But on that same farm in 2016, my first year hunting it, I noticed that during the secondary rut, that middle to later part of December, that there was a tremendous influx of mature bucks. I actually saw more rutting activity in December in 2016 on that farm than I did during November. And I think that's because on this particular farm, there is an extremely high deer population. So there's a lot of does. There's a lot of bucks too, but not all of the does get bred during that first cycle. And so there's a lot of younger does and doe fawns that come in December. And so I, in 2016, experienced all of a sudden that property seemed like it inhaled like 5 or 6, 4-year-old or better deer in December, and they were chasing does like it was November. So I was kind of banking on that same thing to happen. I had not actually set foot on that property since October 1st. I had left it completely alone during the rut, just had cameras running, and I knew I was going to go back and try to get a deer during late season. So I had a hay bale blind set up, basically overlooking a big bottom that was full of alfalfa, where I know does like to come out and feed every single evening. It's normally like a spot where I go and try to shoot a doe. And opening night of muzzleloader season was, I think, the 19th of December. The wind wasn't right, so I didn't go. So 20th was my first night to actually go and hunt. And so I just figured it was the right time of year. I figured that property would have inhaled some mature bucks if there were, in fact, some does that were going to come into heat. So I got into my blind after work. I actually got there pretty late. I didn't get in my blind till almost 4 o'clock. And as soon as I got in my blind, there were about 6 doe fawns, hopped the fence, came out, started feeding in the alfalfa, and kind of meandered past me at about 100 yards. And literally about 4 minutes later, I saw a big body walking through the cedars out of that sanctuary on the neighbors. Saw him. He came up, hopped the fence, stood there, looked, and he saw that herd of doe fawns, and he just started marching right at him like he was on a mission. I mean, his hocks were black and just running down the back of his legs. He was ruddy like it was the middle of November, but it was December 20th. And so, I mean, you could have probably walked up there and yelled at that deer and not scared him away. He was on a mission to go to those doe fawns. And so he basically pranced right in front of my bale blind at 100 yards and actually stopped on his own to look at the does, and I dropped him with my muzzleloader. So my muzzleloader season ended pretty quick.
Yeah, that of the 3 hunts you just discussed, that was the most you knew he was hanging out there, and just you closed the deal.
Yeah, it was just a numbers thing. I knew where the most does within a couple miles were going to be, and I just anticipated that the bucks would do what they did the year before, and there'd be a good one there somewhere following them.
Again, folks, data, trends, patterns, whatever you want to call it. Unpressured deer, though, and that's what I've heard, throughout our whole chat here. You're hunting unpressured deer because you get in, get out, land safe that creek bottom, and he never blew up. You never blew him out of there.
Well, right, and even though I hunted a lot of days, I only sat in the creek bottom once because I waited till the conditions were right. I knew he was in there every day, but it wasn't worth it to me to educate him if the conditions weren't perfect. And that's one thing I'm big on too. I don't care how big the deer is. If the conditions aren't right, I'm not going in there. It's not worth it to me to risk educating that deer. They're already so smart. It's not worth it to me to give them any more of an advantage.
Well said. So let's end up the show and talk about what everybody's been doing for the last month or so, and that's shed hunting. What does that tell you about the bucks in your area or on the land that you have permission to hunt?
Well, to me, it does a couple things. I mean, I absolutely love shed hunting. There's just something about it. To me, I almost get more excited finding an antler than I do killing a deer. Sometimes to me, it shows me number one, the number and quality of bucks that are in the area, which is always a confidence booster if you know that, if that shed antler's laying there, that deer survived the hunting season and he's most likely going to be around this fall. And so that's a big part of it. It's an inventory thing to kind of know what deer I need to start looking for. And honestly, shed hunting for me is a lot about getting data that I can't get during the season, because most of the places that hold the bigger deer are places I never set foot in. And, there's sanctuaries that I will only go into, a couple times a year when I go in there and look for sheds, and that's it. So I'm going in there for as much as data collection as I am actually looking for the antlers. If I can find, a particular ridge where I think a particular buck or a group of bucks are bedding, I can file that away and actually use that in the fall. And then also, trying to confirm that, that the deer that I was going after, were they as big as I thought they were, or were they as old as I thought they were? And it just helps me. They're all just little puzzle pieces that I use with all the data I get the rest of the year to try to piece together a plan on deer.
Now, all total, how many acres do you have permission to hunt on?
All totaled, probably about 2,500 or so. But that's not in one. For people who think, 2,500 acres, that's huge. Well, that's not all in one chunk. It's a bunch of little farms. It's 100 here, or 60 there, or 80 or 200. And farmland. It's not like that's all timber and huntable land. It's a lot of open grain fields as part of that acreage, and pastures, and so. But overall, it's about 2,500 acres.
So 20%, timbered, and 80% tillable,
Probably.
or pasture. So it's amazing, where the deer can live. I guess that's the point I was trying to drive to. And so many times we have big woods, and there's a lot of places in the upper Midwest, huge woods. And it's a lot harder to find mature bucks unless you really spend a lot of time in the farm belt, if you will. They're zones of living and places they're living, albeit some are tiny. I mean, just swales they might be living in. But if you spend the time, you're gonna figure out what they're doing, where they're doing it, when they're doing it, and it's such a fascinating sport. I mean, it really is.
It is. I have so much respect for the whitetail. I mean, I think he's one of the most majestic, smartest creatures that was ever put on this earth. And I have a ton of respect for them in what they have to go through every single day just to survive. And not just from hunters. I mean, they're constantly being, whether it's predators or vehicles or hunters or dogs or whatever it is, they're such survivors, and I have a ton of respect for them.
As do all deer hunters, one way or another. We've all been schooled so many times that you go, how did that happen? I mean, when you know the woods and places so well, if they're hunting for years and years and years, it said he should be right there, and then he pops up someplace 100 yards away, and go, oh man, everything was right. Well, he patterned us better I've been patterned. He patterned me better than I patterned him. Let's call it that way.
Oh, for sure. I mean, deer have personalities and they have memories. I mean, they remember things better than I think a lot of hunters give them credit for.
Yeah, important point because I've had deer and watch them come by stands. Know he's hunting them, and I'm only a couple hundred yards away, and I can see that stand, and they'll come up and they'll bucks they'll pop their head up and just look at the stand and and there's nobody there. There's no scent. There's no anything. The stand been there for months, and they just kind of check it out. So, there are lots. Everybody knows they're smart, and I think the maturity are a heck of a lot smarter than we give them credit for. That's my thought.
Yeah, I think when a buck turns 4 years old, it's something weird happens. It's like he walks up to a pond and sees his reflection and sees he's got a great big rack, and he's like, I need to act different now. They turn into a different animal, and they don't even think the same way as a regular deer anymore.
Yeah. Well said. Well, Jordan, we're well into an hour of your time, and I want to just thank you so much. And I can't wait to talk to you, next spring and find out what the heck happened in 2018. That would, I really look forward to it because you bring, a real in-depth sense of what mature deer hunting is all about, and the aspect of spending more time scouting and figuring out what the deer's doing than actually hunting them. In your case, I think you said, you had two first sit kills, and the other one took a little bit of time, but a lot of people have told me that. Very successful people have told me that on the show that they do all the work, and then the hunt. If they do their part right, they know that deer's coming, and it's just a matter of is the wind going to change? Are you going to drop your rangefinder? Who knows? And all those things happen. But other than that, 1, 2, or 3 days, and they've got that buck on the ground, or they leave. The game over, and he won, and on to the next one on the hit list. Your thoughts on
Yeah.
that? We're going to close up.
Well, I mean, you're right. I mean, preparation is key, and the more of it you do, the better chance you have. But chances are, more often than not, the deer's still going to win. But it's nice when it works out once in a while, and the more preparation you do, the higher chance you have of it working out more often.
Well, Jordan Howell, thank you so much for being a guest on Whitetail Rendezvous, and thousands of people are going to hear, your podcast and your episode. And folks, if you have questions, Jordan, what's the email that you'd like people to reach out to you?
Sure, it's Jordon at radixtrailcameras.com.
And of course, you can reach me at whitetailrendezvous@gmail.com. So with that, again, Jordan, thank you so much for being the guest, and, keep up doing your work, and, start doing some self-filming, because that, just, throwing it up on YouTube, I think that would be an interesting, journal also.
Well, it's something that I'm kind of toying with. We'll see. I mean, it's definitely a fun journey. So it'll be fun to see what happens this year. Hopefully, I can. I won't say I'm gonna predict that I'm gonna have as much success as I did in 2017, but hopefully I'll be able to find at least one good one.
And with that, folks, I'm going to say adios, and we'll be talking soon. Hey, if you're putting in for your tags out here in Colorado, it's April. It's 3rd of 6th. I don't have the proclamation in front of me, but check that out. And if you want to hunt out west, one of the best companies to give you research is GoHunt.com, and I've been aligned with them for a long time, and just great guys over there, Chris Proder and the crew. So, with that, Jordan, we're going to sign off and say have a great day, sir.
All right. Thank you. You too.
Hey, folks, we're heading over to Oklahoma today, and we're going to visit with Chad Bales. Now, Chad started at 12 years old with his grandpa's 30-30, and guess what? He did get a 6-point buck. He's never stopped hunting whitetails since then. He's been with industry groups called Outdoor Legacy. He's working with some other companies, and there's a field camera now, a trail camera that he's using, that he's getting some good success. But the biggest thing that he's done, he started a supplement program for deer on a lease in his home state of Oklahoma. All in all, Chad does one thing. He hunts hard, and he's very fortunate because in 2016 he had a tree stand accident and his harness broke and he fell and got a little banged up, but that was all. So he's got a great story to tell about being safe all the time. So sit back, listen to another great episode of Whitetail Rendezvous.
Thanks for joining us. Be sure to tune in tomorrow for another episode of Whitetail Rendezvous, where you can listen and learn from the experts so you can be more successful on your next hunt. Until next time, listen, learn,